Welcome back to Footnotes and Folly. I am Pemberton. This is part 4. Herod, with the Roman legions of Sosius, lays siege to Jerusalem and takes it by storm. Antigonus, the last king of the Hasmonean line, is dragged away and beheaded at Antony's order, and the old dynasty is finished. But Herod's throne is never safe. Cleopatra covets his kingdom and maneuvers Antony into setting him against the Arabs, and when Antony falls at Actium, Herod must go and gamble everything on the mercy of the victor, Octavian Caesar, who, to everyone's surprise, confirms him and makes him greater than before. Let us continue.
Meanwhile, Herod's affairs in Judea were in a bad state. He had left his brother Joseph with full authority, but had charged him to make no attacks against Antigonus until his return, because Machaerus would not be the kind of assistant he could rely on, as was clear from what he had already done. But as soon as Joseph heard that his brother was very far away, he neglected the command he had received and marched toward Jericho with 5 cohorts that Machaerus sent with him. This movement was intended to seize the grain, since it was now the middle of summer. But when his enemies attacked him in the mountains and in places difficult to pass, Joseph was killed while fighting very bravely in the battle, and the entire Roman cohorts were destroyed. These cohorts were newly raised men gathered from Syria, and there was no mixture among them of those called veteran soldiers, who might have supported the men unskilled in war. This victory was not enough for Antigonus. He went to such a degree of rage that he treated Joseph's dead body barbarously. When he got possession of the bodies of those who had been killed, he cut off Joseph's head, even though Joseph's brother Phares would have given 50 talents as the price to redeem it. After this victory of Antigonus, the affairs of Galilee were thrown into such disorder that Antigonus's party brought the principal men who were on Herod's side to the lake and drowned them there. A great change also occurred in Idumea, where Machaerus was building a wall around one of the fortresses, called Gittha. But Herod had not yet been informed of these things. After the taking of Samosata, Antony set Sosius over the affairs of Syria, and ordered him to assist Herod against Antigonus, and then departed into Egypt. Sosius sent 2 legions ahead of him into Judea to assist Herod, and soon afterward followed himself with the rest of his army. When Herod was at Daphne near Antioch, he had dreams that clearly foretold his brother's death. As he leaped from his bed in distress, messengers arrived and told him of that calamity. After lamenting this misfortune for a while, he put aside the main part of his mourning and hurried to march against his enemies. He made a march beyond his strength and went as far as Libanus. There he obtained 800 men from those who lived near that mountain to assist him, and he joined 1 Roman legion to them. With these, before daybreak, he made an incursion into Galilee, met his enemies, and drove them back to the place they had left. He also made an immediate and continual attack on the fortress. Yet before he could take it, a most terrible storm forced him to pitch his camp in the neighboring villages. But after a few days, when the 2nd legion that came from Antony joined him, the enemy were frightened by his power and abandoned their fortifications during the night. After this, Herod marched through Jericho, making all possible haste to avenge himself on his brother's murderers. There a providential sign happened to him, and because he unexpectedly escaped from it, he gained the reputation of being very dear to God. That evening many of the principal men feasted with him. After the feast was over and all the guests had gone out, the house immediately collapsed. Herod judged this to be a general sign of the dangers he would undergo, and how he would escape them in the war he was undertaking. In the morning he set out with his army. About 6,000 of his enemies came running down from the mountains, and began to fight with those in his front. Yet they did not dare to be so bold as to engage the Romans hand to hand, but threw stones and darts at them from a distance. By this means they wounded a considerable number, and in this action Herod himself was wounded in the side with a dart. Antigonus wanted to appear to exceed Herod not only in courage but also in the number of his men, so he sent Pappus, one of his companions, with an army against Samaria. It was Pappus's fortune to oppose Machaerus. But Herod overran the enemy's country, demolished 5 small cities, destroyed 2,000 men who were in them, burned their houses, and then returned to his camp. His headquarters were at the village called Cana. A great multitude of Jews came to him every day, both from Jericho and from other parts of the country. Some were moved by hatred of Antigonus, some by regard for the glorious actions Herod had done, and others were led on by an unreasonable desire for change. Herod immediately fell upon them. As for Pappus and his party, they were not frightened either by the number of Herod's men or by their zeal, but marched out with great eagerness to fight them. The battle came to close combat. Other parts of Pappus's army resisted for a while, but Herod, running the greatest risk because of the rage he felt over his brother's murder, wanted revenge on those who had caused it. He soon defeated those who opposed him, and after beating them he always turned his force against those who still stood firm, pursuing them all. A great slaughter followed. Some were forced back into the village from which they had come out, and Herod pressed hard upon the hindmost and killed a vast number of them. He also entered the village with the enemy. Every house was filled with armed men, and the upper rooms above were crowded with soldiers for their defense. When he had defeated those outside, he tore the houses apart and dragged out those inside. On many of them he had the roofs shaken down, so that they perished in heaps. As for those who fled out of the ruins, the soldiers received them with swords in their hands. The multitude of those killed and lying in heaps was so great that the conquerors could not pass along the roads. The enemy could not bear this blow, so when the gathered multitude saw that those in the village had been killed, they scattered and fled. In confidence from this victory, Herod would have marched immediately to Jerusalem if he had not been hindered by the depth of winter coming on. This was the obstacle that lay in the way of his complete and glorious progress, and it prevented Antigonus from being conquered then, since he was already disposed to abandon the city. That evening Herod had already dismissed his friends to refresh themselves after their fatigue. While he was still hot in his armor, he went like a common soldier to bathe, attended by only one servant. Before he entered the bath, one of the enemies met him face to face with a sword in his hand, then a second, then a third, and after that more of them. These were men who had fled from the battle into the bath in their armor, and they had been hiding there for some time in great terror. When they saw the king, they trembled with fear and ran past him in flight, although he was naked, trying to get out to the public road. By chance there was no one else at hand who could seize these men, and Herod was satisfied that he himself had come to no harm, so they all escaped safely. But the next day Herod had the head of Pappus, the general of Antigonus, who had been killed in the battle, cut off and sent to his brother Pheroras, as punishment for their slain brother, for Pappus was the man who killed Joseph. As winter was passing, Herod marched to Jerusalem and brought his army to its wall. This was the 3rd year since he had been made king at Rome. He pitched his camp before the temple, because the city could be besieged on that side, and that was where Pompey had taken the city. He divided the work among the army, demolished the suburbs, raised 3 banks, and gave orders for towers to be built on those banks. He left the most laborious of his acquaintances in charge of the works. But he himself went to Samaria to take his wife, the daughter of Alexander, the son of Aristobulus, who had been betrothed to him before, as we have already said. Thus he accomplished this along the way during the siege of the city, for he already held his enemies in great contempt. After Herod had married Mariamne, he returned to Jerusalem with a larger army. Sosius also joined him with a large army, both horsemen and footmen. Sosius sent them ahead through the inland parts, while he himself marched along Phoenicia. When the whole army was assembled, consisting of 11 regiments of footmen and 6,000 horsemen, besides the Syrian auxiliaries, who formed no small part of the army, they pitched their camp near the north wall. Herod relied on the decree of the Senate by which he had been made king, and Sosius relied on Antony, who had sent the army under him to Herod's assistance. The multitude of Jews in the city was divided into several factions. The people crowded around the temple, who were the weaker part, declared that in such times the happiest and most religious man was the one who would die first. The bolder and hardier men gathered in groups and took to robbing others in various ways. In particular, they plundered the places around the city, because no food was left either for the horses or for the men. Yet some of the warlike men who were used to regular fighting were appointed to defend the city during the siege. These drove away from the wall those who were raising the banks, and they were always inventing one engine or another to obstruct the engines of the enemy. In nothing did they have so much success as in the underground mines. As for the robberies that were committed, the king arranged ambushes to restrain their excursions. As for the lack of provisions, he provided that supplies should be brought to them from great distances. He was also too strong for the Jews because of the Romans' skill in the art of war. Although the Jews were bold to the utmost degree, they did not dare come to open battle with the Romans, which would have meant certain death. Instead, through their underground mines, they would suddenly appear in the middle of them. Before the Romans could batter down one wall, the Jews built another in its place. To sum it all up, they showed no lack either of hard labor or of contrivance, since they had resolved to hold out to the very last. Indeed, although so great an army lay around them, they endured a siege of 5 months, until some of Herod's chosen men dared to climb onto the wall and dropped into the city, followed afterward by Sosius's centurions. They first seized the area around the temple. When the army poured in, vast multitudes were slaughtered everywhere, partly because the Romans were enraged by the length of the siege, and partly because the Jews who were with Herod earnestly tried to ensure that none of their adversaries remained. So great multitudes were cut to pieces as they crowded together in narrow streets, in houses, or while fleeing to the temple. No mercy was shown to infants, the elderly, or the weaker sex. Although the king sent men around and asked them to spare the people, no one could be persuaded to hold back his right hand from slaughter. They killed people of every age like madmen. Then Antigonus, without regard either to his former fortune or his present condition, came down from the citadel and fell at Sosius's feet. Sosius did not pity him at all because of the change in his condition, but laughed at him beyond measure and called him Antigona. Yet he did not treat him like a woman or let him go free. Instead, he put him in chains and kept him in custody. Herod's present concern, now that he had his enemies under his power, was to restrain the zeal of his foreign auxiliaries. The multitude of strange people was very eager to see the temple and what was sacred inside the holy house itself. The king tried to restrain them partly by exhortations, partly by threats, and even partly by force, because he thought the victory would be worse than a defeat for him if anything that ought not to be seen was seen by them. At the same time, he also forbade the spoiling of the city. He asked Sosius most earnestly whether the Romans, by emptying the city of both money and men in this way, intended to leave him king of a desert. He told him that he judged the dominion of the whole inhabited earth too small a compensation for the slaughter of so many citizens. When Sosius said it was only just to allow the soldiers this plunder as a reward for what they had suffered during the siege, Herod answered that he would give every one of the soldiers a reward out of his own money. In this way he purchased the deliverance of his country and fulfilled his promises to them. He made magnificent presents to each soldier, and proportionate gifts to their commanders, and he gave Sosius himself with truly royal generosity, so that no one went away except in a wealthy condition. After this, Sosius dedicated a crown of gold to God, and then left Jerusalem, leading Antigonus away in chains to Antony. Then the axe brought Antigonus to his end. He still had a fond desire for life and some weak hopes of it to the last, but by his cowardly behavior he well deserved to die by it. After this, King Herod distinguished among the multitude in the city those who had been on his side. He made still more his friends by the honors he conferred on them, but those of Antigonus's party he killed. Since his money ran low, he converted all his ornaments into money and sent it to Antony and those around him. Yet even by this he could not purchase exemption from all sufferings, for Antony was now bewitched by his love for Cleopatra, and was entirely conquered by her charms. Cleopatra had put to death all her relatives until no one near her in blood remained alive, and after that she began killing those who were not related to her at all. She slandered the principal men among the Syrians to Antony, and persuaded him to have them killed, so that she might easily become mistress of what they possessed. She even extended her avaricious temper to the Jews and Arabians, and secretly worked to have Herod and Malichus, the kings of those two nations, killed by Antony's order. As for these commands of Cleopatra to Antony, he complied in part. Although he considered it too abominable a thing to kill such good and great kings, he was nevertheless alienated from his friendship with them. He also took away a great part of their country, including even the plantation of palm trees at Jericho, where the balsam tree also grows, and bestowed these places on Cleopatra. He gave her all the cities on this side of the river Eleutherus as well, except Tyre and Sidon. After she became mistress of these places, and had accompanied Antony on his expedition against the Parthians as far as Euphrates, she came through Apamia and Damascus into Judea. There Herod pacified her anger against him with large presents. He also leased from her the places that had been torn away from his kingdom, at the yearly rent of 200 talents. He conducted her as far as Pelusium and paid her every possible respect. Not long after this, Antony returned from Parthia and brought with him Artabazus, the son of Tigranes, as a captive and a present for Cleopatra. This Parthian was immediately given to her, together with his money and all the plunder taken with him. When the war around Actium began, Herod prepared to come to Antony's assistance, since he was now free from his troubles in Judea and had gained Hyrcania, a place that had been held by Antigonus's sister. However, Cleopatra cunningly prevented him from sharing in the dangers Antony went through. As already noted, she had plotted against the kings of Judea and Arabia. She persuaded Antony to commit the war against the Arabians to Herod, so that if Herod prevailed, she might become mistress of Arabia, and if he were defeated, she might become mistress of Judea. In this way, she hoped to destroy one of those kings by means of the other. Yet this scheme turned to Herod's advantage. At the very beginning he took hostages from the enemy, gathered a great body of horsemen, and ordered them to march against the Arabians near Dispus. He defeated that army, although it fought resolutely against him. After this defeat, the Arabians were greatly stirred and assembled in vast multitudes at Canatha, a city of Celesyria, where they waited for the Jews. When Herod came there, he tried to manage the war with special prudence and ordered his men to build a wall around their camp. But the multitude did not obey these orders. They were so emboldened by their previous victory that they immediately attacked the Arabians, beat them at the first onset, and then pursued them. Yet snares had been laid for Herod during that pursuit. Athenio, one of Cleopatra's generals and always an opponent of Herod, sent the men of that country out of Canatha against him. Because of this fresh attack, the Arabians took courage and turned back. They joined their numerous forces around stony places that were difficult to cross, routed Herod's men there, and made a great slaughter of them. Those who escaped from the battle fled to Ormizza, where the Arabians surrounded their camp and took it along with all the men in it. A short time after this calamity, Herod came to bring them help, but he arrived too late. The cause of that blow was that the officers would not obey orders. If the fight had not begun so suddenly, Athenio would not have found the proper opportunity for the snares he laid against Herod. Nevertheless, Herod afterward got even with the Arabians. He overran their country and did them more harm than their one victory could compensate for. While he was avenging himself on his enemies, another providential calamity fell upon him. In the 7th year of his reign, when the war around Actium was at its height, at the beginning of spring, the earth was shaken. The earthquake destroyed an immense number of cattle and 30,000 men, but the army suffered no harm because it lay in the open air. Meanwhile, the report of this earthquake raised the Arabians to greater courage, because, as is always the case in melancholy accidents, they enlarged it to a fabulous height and pretended that all Judea had been overthrown. Supposing, therefore, that they could easily take possession of a land left without inhabitants, they first sacrificed the ambassadors who had come to them from the Jews, and then immediately marched into Judea. The Jewish nation was frightened by this invasion and deeply dispirited by the greatness of one calamity after another. Yet Herod gathered them together, and tried to encourage them to defend themselves with the following speech. The present fear that has seized you seems to me very unreasonable. It is true that you might justly be dismayed at the providential chastisement that has fallen upon you, but it is unmanly to let yourselves be equally terrified by an invasion of men. As for me, I am so far from being frightened by our enemies after this earthquake that I imagine God has thereby laid bait for the Arabians, so that we may be avenged on them. Their present invasion comes more from our accidental misfortunes than from any great confidence in their weapons or in their own fitness for action. Now a hope that depends not on a man's own power, but on another man's ill success, is a very uncertain thing. There is no certainty among men, either in their bad fortune or their good fortune. We can easily observe that fortune changes and passes from one side to another. You may readily learn this from examples among yourselves. When you were once victors in the former fight, your enemies overcame you at last. Very likely it will now happen that those who think themselves sure of beating you will themselves be beaten. For when men are very confident, they are not on their guard, while fear teaches men to act with caution. So I venture to prove from your very timidity that you ought to take courage. When you were bolder than you ought to have been, and bolder than I wished you to be, and marched on, Athenio's treachery succeeded. But your present slowness and apparent dejection of mind are to me a pledge and assurance of victory. It is proper to be provident beforehand, but when we come to action, we ought to raise our spirits and make our enemies, however wicked they may be, believe that neither any human misfortune, nor even any providential one, can ever depress the courage of Jews while they are alive. No Jew will ever overlook an Arabian, or allow such a man to become lord of his goods, when he has in a manner taken him captive, and many times as well. Do not disturb yourselves at the shaking of lifeless creatures, and do not imagine that this earthquake is a sign of another calamity. Such movements of the elements happen according to the course of nature, and they mean nothing more to men than the harm they immediately do by themselves. Perhaps there may be some short warning beforehand in the case of pestilences, famines, and earthquakes, but these calamities themselves have their force limited by themselves and do not foretell any other calamity. Indeed, what greater harm can the war do to us, even if it is violent, than the earthquake has already done? No, there is a visible sign of our enemy's destruction, and a very great one too. It is not natural, nor does it come from the hand of foreigners. It is this: they have barbarously murdered our ambassadors, contrary to the common law of mankind. They have destroyed so many as if they considered them sacrifices to God for this war. But they will not escape his great eye or his invincible right hand. We shall soon be avenged on them, if we still keep any of the courage of our forefathers and rise boldly to punish these covenant breakers. Therefore let everyone go forward and fight, not so much for his wife or his children or for the danger his country is in, as for these ambassadors of ours. Those dead ambassadors will conduct this war of ours better than we ourselves who are alive. And if you will be ruled by me, I myself will go before you into danger. For you know well enough that your courage is irresistible, unless you injure yourselves by acting rashly. When Herod had encouraged them with the speech and saw the eagerness with which they went, he offered sacrifice to God. After that sacrifice, he crossed the river Jordan with his army, and pitched his camp near Philadelphia, close to the enemy, and near a fortification that lay between them. He then shot at them from a distance and wished to come to battle at once, for some of them had been sent ahead to seize that fortification. But the king sent men who immediately drove them out of the fortification, while he himself went at the front of the army, which he arranged in battle order every day, inviting the Arabians to fight. None of the Arabians came out of their camp, for they were in terrible fear, and their general Elthamus was so afraid that he could not say a word. So Herod came upon them and pulled their fortification to pieces. By this means they were compelled to come out to fight, which they did in disorder, with horsemen and footmen mixed together. They were superior to the Jews in number, but inferior in eagerness, although their very despair of victory forced them to expose themselves to danger. While they resisted, not many of them were killed, but as soon as they turned their backs, many were trampled to pieces by the Jews, and many by their own men, and so perished. 5,000 fell dead in their flight, while the rest of the multitude avoided immediate death by crowding into the fortification. Herod surrounded these men and besieged them. Though they were ready to be taken by their armed enemies, another additional distress fell on them: thirst and lack of water. The king would not listen to their ambassadors, and when they offered 500 talents as the price of their redemption, he pressed them still harder. Burned up by thirst, they came out and voluntarily surrendered themselves in multitudes to the Jews, until within 5 days 4,000 of them had been put in chains. On the 6th day, the multitude who remained despaired of saving themselves and came out to fight. Herod fought them and again killed about 7,000. Thus he punished Arabia so severely and so completely broke the spirit of its men that the nation chose him as their ruler. Herod was now immediately concerned about a most important matter, because of his friendship with Antony, who had already been defeated at Actium by Caesar. Yet he was more afraid than actually harmed, for Caesar did not think he had completely undone Antony as long as Herod continued to assist him. Nevertheless, the king resolved to expose himself to danger. Accordingly, he sailed to Rhodes, where Caesar then was, and came to him without his diadem, dressed and appearing like a private person, but behaving like a king. He concealed none of the truth, but spoke openly before him. O Caesar, as I was made king of the Jews by Antony, so I declare that I have used my royal authority in the best manner, and entirely for his advantage. I will not hide this further. You would certainly have found me in arms, an inseparable companion of his, if the Arabians had not hindered me. Even so, I sent him as many auxiliaries as I was able, and many tens of thousands of cori of grain. Indeed, I did not desert my benefactor after the blow he received at Actium. Instead, when I was no longer able to assist him in the war, I gave him the best advice I could. I told him there was only one way to recover his affairs, and that was to kill Cleopatra. I promised him that if she were once dead, I would supply him with money and walls for his security, along with an army and myself to assist him in his war against you. But his affection for Cleopatra stopped his ears, and so did God himself, who has bestowed the government on you. I acknowledge that I too am overcome together with him. With his last fortune, I have laid aside my diadem and come here to you, placing my hopes of safety in your virtue. I ask that you first consider how faithful a friend I have been, and not whose friend I have been. No, you shall not only be safe, but you shall be a king, and more firmly than you were before. You are worthy to reign over many subjects because of the steadiness of your friendship. Try to be equally constant in your friendship to me now that I have succeeded, which is what I expect from the generosity of your disposition. However, Antony did well in preferring Cleopatra to you, for by this means we have gained you through her madness. Thus you began to be my friend before I began to be yours. On this account Quintus Didius has written to me that you sent him assistance against the gladiators. Therefore I assure you that I will confirm the kingdom to you by decree. I shall also try to do you some further kindness hereafter, so that you may find no loss in the absence of Antony. When Caesar had spoken these obliging words to the king, and had put the diadem around his head again, he proclaimed what he had bestowed on him by a decree, in which he magnificently enlarged on his praise of the man. Herod then obliged Caesar to be kind to him by the presents he gave him. He also asked Caesar to forgive Alexander, one of Antony's friends, who had become a suppliant to him. But Caesar's anger against Alexander prevailed. He complained of the many very great offenses of the man for whom Herod was petitioning, and by this means rejected his request. After this Caesar went through Syria toward Egypt, and Herod received him with royal and rich entertainments. First Herod rode along with Caesar as he reviewed his army around Ptolemais, and he feasted Caesar and all his friends. Then he distributed to the rest of the army everything necessary for a feast. He also made plentiful provision of water for them, when they were to march as far as Pelusium through a dry country, and he did the same again when they returned from there. No necessities were lacking for that army. Therefore both Caesar and his soldiers thought that Herod's kingdom was too small for the generous presents he made them. For this reason, when Caesar came into Egypt and Cleopatra and Antony were dead, he not only bestowed other marks of honor on Herod, but also added to his kingdom. He gave him not only the country that had been taken from him by Cleopatra, but also Gadara, Hippos, and Samaria. Moreover, among the maritime cities, he gave him Gaza, Anthedon, Joppa, and Stratos Tower. He also presented him with 400 Gauls, or Galatians, as a bodyguard, which they had formerly been for Cleopatra. Nothing induced Caesar so strongly to make these gifts as the generosity of the man who received them. Moreover, after the first games at Actium, Caesar added to Herod's kingdom both the region called Trachonitis, and the lands near it, Batanea, and the country of Auranitis. This happened on the following occasion. Zenodorus, who had hired the house of Lysanias, had all along been sending robbers out of Trachonitis among the Damascenes. The Damascenes therefore appealed to Varro, the president of Syria, and asked him to report the calamity they were suffering to Caesar. When Caesar learned of it, he sent back orders that this nest of robbers should be destroyed. Varro therefore made an expedition against them, cleared the land of those men, and took it away from Zenodorus. Caesar afterward bestowed it on Herod, so that it would not again become a refuge for the robbers who had come against Damascus. Caesar also made Herod procurator of all Syria 10 years afterward, when he came again into that province. This was established so firmly that the other procurators could do nothing in the administration without Herod's advice. When Zenodorus died, Caesar bestowed on him all the land that lay between Trachonitis and Galilee. Yet what was still more important to Herod was that he was loved by Caesar next after Agrippa, and by Agrippa next after Caesar. From this he reached a very great degree of happiness. Even so, the greatness of his soul exceeded it, and the main part of his magnanimity was directed toward the promotion of piety.
And we will stop there, with Herod secure at last, the friend of Caesar and master of a growing kingdom. Next time, in Part 5, the dark turn in the magnificent cities and the great temple he built for glory and, behind the splendor, the murder of his beloved wife Mariamne and the slow poisoning of his own house. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.